All right, so we're going to pick up with G. This in section 3 is if your buyer is asking for the seller to help them out with any closing costs. Maybe they've got lender fees that they need to cover and they don't quite have enough for the down payment and their closing costs. This would be where you'd ask for a seller credit. And here you would put a dollar amount in there. So let's just say our seller is asking for $7,500. Now, a good rule to use here is don't just go and fill this out with some random number that you think will cover it. Let's just suppose that I think that, $12,000 ought to be, it can't be more than that. So we're just going to ask for $12,000. Understand that what a seller is going to do, or a good listing agent, what they're going to do with your offer is they're going to break it down into a net sheet to show the seller what it would look like if they accept your buyer's offer. If you put $12,000 in here, the listing agent's going to prepare a net sheet that shows $12,000 coming off of the seller's net to pay for this cost. What ends up happening is if your buyer really only needed $6,000 to cover their closing costs, the language down here in 5E is going to say that the buyer only gets what they need, and anything that goes unused is a credit back to the seller. The seller doesn't owe them the difference in a price reduction or anything like that. And that can I've seen that cause a lot of despair with buyers and their agents, is if buyers end up trying to somehow claw back that money because the agent was lazy and didn't find out what the closing cost would be. The good thing to do here is speak with your buyer's lender, find out a pretty accurate amount, and get it as close to that amount as possible. You don't want to be asking for more than your buyers actually need. So their closing costs might actually be $8,000, but your buyer can cover some of it. Only ask for what your buyer needs to make up the difference so that they can get into this property. So I'll just use, let's say, $4,000. All right. Additional seller credit terms. It says right here, this is not the buyer's broker compensation. This would be if there was some other kind of credit term. You would write it in here. You can call me directly if you have a credit that you think your buyer needs that doesn't fall under their closing costs. Seller payment to compensate buyer's broker, G3. This is the box that you check if your buyer is asking for the seller to credit what they owe you on your BRBC or PSRA. So you would put in here the amount that, it might be the full amount that your buyer owes you, but it could be something less, or you might not even ask for it at all. Maybe your buyer says, I will pay the whole amount that I owe you because I want my offer to look really clean, really great compared to the other offers they're going to get. You could leave it blank, or they might just be asking the seller to pay 1%. They might be asking the seller to pay 1% or some flat dollar amount. If it's a flat dollar amount, you put it down here. Maybe you're asking for the seller to cover $5,000 of what the buyer owes toward compensation. This would be where you'd put those terms. My pet peeve, I talked about it in the other video with the BRBC, is that oftentimes this term gets countered by listing agents and they counter it incorrectly. Remember, this document is an agreement between buyer and seller, not between the seller and the buyer's agent. So the seller's only agreeing to what they're willing to credit the buyer in order to pay their agent. They don't get to decide what the buyer's agent is paid. But in this case, I'm just going to put in here that the buyer's asking for the seller to pay 3%. Verification of cash. If this was a cash offer, which I didn't mention earlier, you could check this box to say that it's an all cash offer, and it'll zero out all these other financing terms. If it's an all cash offer, then this would be how much time you have to show the seller, if they accept your offer, that you have verification. If you're attaching it to the offer, you don't need to do anything. So if you've got your like a bank statement with some things sharpied out so that they can't, the personal information's out of there. You've got proof of funds and you attach it to the offer, leave it alone. If you didn't attach it to the offer, check a box and say how many days it's going to take for you to get that information to the seller. Default is it's attached. Verification of down payment and closing costs, it's attached to the offer. Most agents don't do this, but they don't check this box either. So this is showing like a bank statement that your buyer actually has the money for the down payment. If you didn't attach it, then you need to check a box. All right. Verification of loan application, check a box. Or if you've got the pre-qual letter, you'd check this box. If you've got a full loan pre-approval, check this box. If you've got a fully underwritten pre-approval, maybe something fell apart on a previous offer, but they're already underwritten, ready to go, you would check this box. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be checking the pre-qualification box. And this is usually what we see, that a pre-qualification is attached to the offer. But agents seem to forget about these other two. Remember, this down payment and closing costs, you're going to want to check this box if you didn't provide it, or you're going to want to provide that bank statement showing they have the funds. Trust me, if you have an offer where you have the verification of your buyer's down payment and closing costs attached to the offer, that's going to make your offer stand out a bit. It's going to help your buyer's offer stand out above all the others and show that your buyer is serious. You're going to impress the other agent. So I'm going to go ahead and check this box that I've attached, or that it's coming. Actually, no, I'm going to attach it. Final verification of condition. The default is that your verification of property condition will be done 5 days before close of escrow. That's typically plenty of time. And any assignment requests. An assignment is if my buyer gets this property into escrow and then decides to find someone else to become a buyer for the property, they have 17 days by default to assign it. Sometimes you see a buyer finds out that they need someone else on the loan, and so they'll do an additional buyer. But assignment request is a more advanced topic for a different video. All right, I'm going to end it here and we'll continue on the next section on L, the contingencies.